Thanks everybody. What it's turned out to be is that my presentation will kind of follow on a little bit from Brad's from the first session. So hopefully we'll sort of reinforce some of the things he was talking about and give you guys even more strength in the knowledge of what we're talking about actually does make sense. So we're actually talking roughly about responsive web design, but not so much about the actual practice of responsive web design, but more about how it's impacted. Do you want that one? There we go. He said he'd get an ugly one for me, and he did. Not talking so much about the actual practice of responsive web design, but talking about the way it's impacted our normal development life. So we've got this. It's a typical website. I happen to be working with these guys at the minute, helping them build some news products for them. Normal website, heaps of content, heaps of ads. It almost buffets you with the content, and it's huge. It's okay when you try and squeeze it into one of these. The real issue comes when you try and squeeze it into one of these, and many people do. Luckily, these guys have given us a smaller version of the website. Unfortunately, it's still huge too. The number rolling around in the back of my head for the size of the footprint of the mobile site is 2.7 megabytes. Don't quote me on that, but I think I'm correct. It makes sense inside some, like if you're on a tablet in your office or if you're on a mobile phone in the office, it's great. If you're walking between the office and the train station or on the train trying to get home, good luck. So we're actually going to use some principles that have come out of the desire to get content to users in our normal development practice. And how do we do that? We do it with my book, obviously. It'll give you all the grounding for doing your responsive web work. And if you solve that in a weekend as it says you can get my other book about jQuery just to flesh out the whole skill set for you. But it's not as if this problem we're facing now is new. The whole responsive web design debacle started back in the good old days when websites used to run on computers with a 286 chip in them, which is about a 15th of the speed of your mobile phone today, at a maximum of 800 by 600 pixels. And we thought it was the best thing ever, because we used to do 640 by 480. This was huge, until someone brought out 1024 by 768 when they had a massive Morsian leap, and we got a much bigger screen. So we had all this extra space. And that's when the first war started, the first responsive design war. The first war was about, should we center align, should we left align, or should we be fluid and take up the entire space? And we spent hours and pixels and down, it was just ridiculous what we did to try and make sure that our point was getting across. So what the mobile developers, the platform developers have done is said, okay, you're arguing about having 2 browser sizes, we'll fix that. Here's 3. Actually, 3 is not enough. We'll throw in a landscape version of your mobile phone, a smaller tablet for you, that'd be great, you need one of those. And we'll turn your big tablet sideways, and we'll give you a cinema display, and we'll give you a new size mobile phone just to throw in a bit of spice there because everyone's getting used to developing at 320 by 480. And we'll turn other one sideways, and we'll sneak in a laptop. So not only do we now have so many devices, there's no end to the number of devices. And we need to remove ourselves from worrying about actually developing 4 devices and come up with a series of techniques we can use just to make our development better on a day-to-day basis. Because what happened is that these guys have been playing with our trust. So in the good old days, we used to trust that medicine knew what they were doing. It wasn't quite the case. We trusted that scientists would identify things for us cleverly. Hands up if that's a brontosaurus. Hands up if it's what it really is. What is it? Smarty pants. That's an optimisations, which is what a brontosaurus actually was, but the guy who discovered the brontosaurus found everything but the head. And then he found a head. And he went, I'll put the 2 things together and I'll make a new dinosaur. But what he'd actually found was a dinosaur without a head and the head of a smaller dinosaur. Same dinosaur, different size head, put the 2 together, made a new animal. No, it took 100 and something years for them to work out that not a brontosaurus, just an optimisations. So all the kids' songs, out the window completely, just one dinosaur. Pluto. not just a fun character from Disneyland, no longer a planet. We used to be able to trust that planets were planets. Things that were huge, we could trust would stay huge. Poor thing got downgraded. I used to trust that money would stay the same when I was a kid. It didn't. I was born a year after pennies stopped too, until I was crushed. I used to be able to trust that the speed of my car would be okay. I thought going down from 60 to 50 was bad, now I've got to worry about 40 as well. So what we do is we don't try and practice driving to the conditions. You learn how to drive so that you can drive in any conditions, and that's what we need to do with our mobile development as well. Do you get the picture? Because we used to think that browsers were the be-all and end-all, and of course this one died because of this one, which wouldn't die. And even that, no matter what we say is the worst browser, we seem to be able to come up with the worst one as soon as that one dies off. So everybody hated IE6, then we moved across to IE7, of course. Now we hate IE8, and for a while there was a hatred of Firefox in the middle. But now we sort of swear on IE8, and we're not worried so much about IE9 because everyone reckons it's going to be completely supplanted by 10. We'll see. And of course, we had memes about our hatred of browsers. What's missing from this picture? Exactly, there's no Chrome in the picture. We're still hating IE, but we're not doing it with a full set of devices. We're actually simply liking IE7. Oh my God, that's crazy talk. So we start the culture of attitude toward the browser. So we've got our railgun at the top for Chrome, an assault rifle for Firefox. Opera's somehow a sniper rifle. I guess it's just precision one person using it. I got it, yeah. And of course you get down to Internet Explorer, which fires the bullets backwards. So it's important that we, as I said, we start to learn some techniques to help us combat the problems rather than dealing with it. Because this is how I used to start coding in the good old days. A font element, a color attribute, a color, and then some stuff inside it. That was neat. I got told to change the word color to the word style. Okay. Didn't really know I was doing CSS at the time. We hadn't actually filtered down to Australia at that point that we were doing CSS. Someone said you can stop using color names and start using hex values, and that was it. The whole thing took off. We were having great fun. But until that point, we were doing it the right way, and then someone changed the right way. And that's further illustrated by the fact that this is how we used to write images. We used to have to write a width attribute and a height attribute as attributes on the element. And if you didn't do it rightly, the browser would display funny and it would bank up and load and concertina around. It was terrible. So do it this way. There's only one way to do it. Ever. Don't change it. Until someone said, no. CSS. That's the way of the future. Do it in CSS. Use your height. Always do a height. Always do a width because I always have. It's very important to do it. Until now. We don't do any heights. We don't do any widths. We just do max width and let the parent container of the element dictate the size. What it's showing is that we always change the way that we approach what we're doing. And it brings us to the one law of development, which is never, ever follow all the rules. So if you never, ever follow all the rules, and this is a rule, hang on. This brings us to the corollary of web development, which is sometimes follow some of the rules, depending on what suits you best. Now, it's not important to follow any number of rules, but it's important to know that there are things out there that you can do to make your development practice that much more fun. So I would normally do this because we normally speak at things like web directions and WSG, and they've got marketers there and sales guys. So this is saying there's going to be code coming soon, but you guys are okay with it, okay? All right. There'll be 20 rules today, or thereabouts. Sometimes there are sub-rules within other rules, and there's another rule behind the back, but we'll get there in the end. First rule, put your CSS on multiple lines. Who doesn't do this? Oh, that's a rule. That's really useful. I can tell that at least it's got a background of transparent, and maybe something about a border, about what's off to the side in my IDE. I could make it all appear on one line and soft wrap it, that's great, but it's still hard to read, or harder than I need to read. Put it across multiple lines, easy to read, easy to spell. From a human being's perspective, that's the way to do it. Put it through a processor, send it out to the web, gzipped and minified, because that doesn't care. But give human beings a chance to read your code in a nice, easily readable format, And when you come to doing diffs in your favorite diff editor, it makes your job even easier still. This one's fun. Alphabetize your CSS. Does anyone alphabetize their CSS? Excellent! We have got here a div, and we're telling it to have a fire brick red background. It looks like that. Very sexy. We changed the background color to olive drab. So it's going to have now, it's still got a red background. But it says olive drab in the top of the code. I don't understand. Hang on. Spare rule down the bottom of the page. We'd scrolled down in our IDE to a point where we could see the rule we were changing, but we didn't have the attitude to look all the way further through. And we shouldn't have to, really. We should change our style. First of all, removing the double background color, and we get the right effect. But we should change our style. It makes it easier to understand what's in the list. It makes it easier to see you had doubles. So now we've removed 5 rules from that list. We've still got exactly the same effect in the browser, but the browser's having to learn less. It's happier. We're happier. Let's move on. Use a CSS preprocessor. Does anyone not use any sort of preprocessor? Wow. Try one. Have you tried one? Try one, please. It looks just like CSS because in the end it will be. But it does things like allows you to group by indentation, and it gives you a goal to try and get nice rules as short as possible, but group them together. So if you're the sort of person who will open up a style sheet, drop a rule in, go away to something else, come back, at some random place you'll put another rule in about something else, and you end up with this hodgepodge of rules, bad. This will help you come up with a practice that allows you to get your rules in a very ordered fashion. Don't fall into the trap of going deep, because remember that even though it only seems quite shallow here, out in the real world, it's every selector you've got out there. So it's difficult for specificity, it's difficult for maintenance. You don't need to do it either. It just makes it hard for you if you're trying to use a cascade. The next rule, of course, is really use a preprocessor. It's not just about indenting your CSS. This is the mix-in from SAS. It allows us to do a very small amount of code. Thank you. A very small amount of code to get a great deal of output. We hate going through and writing out all the different rules for the vendor prefixing. And what happens if perhaps, or maybe, I don't know, Opera gets bought basically by a WebKit? That's all you do. You change it in one place. Everywhere you use the mix-in throughout your code, you've now got a clean, much more efficient style sheet. Next thing you can use is variables. So rather than having a number in your style sheet which you have to go through and grok and try and work out exactly where the 2.5 rams are, put those variables in one place, start using common maths to work out heights and widths and dimensions, and it makes your mobile development so much more easy because you want to make the border change on all of your elements, one place, done, walk away, very happy. This is what it looks like in the wild. So we've got a vendor prefix. This will set a transform to translate to 3D. That's the one that Mark was talking about that will invoke the GPU. And down the bottom we're using a WebKit calculation based off all of those numbers we're dealing with. We're not going through 3 and 4 and 5 different style sheets. We've got all of our interesting code in one place. Things just become more quick and easy. This one might get some eyebrows at the back of the room, but can't see Benny's not looking. Use whatever you want for class names. Thank you. It was always a rule to never ever use a class name that matched the thing that you were doing with the class. If you wanted to have a green element, don't put a green class on it. This made sense when this was your text editor. We've now advanced so far in our text editing situations that we're using preprocessors, we're using IDEs. We don't need to be held back by strictures that made sense back when we had black and white textpad only, was a notepad only, sorry, editing environments. Go crazy. Call it red, make it green, because in reality, once you realize that you're using it, you just go through and rewrite the rule anyway. Simple, don't get held up by trying to work out names that don't clash semantically. Just enjoy what you're doing. Get on and get to the really important stuff of getting your behavior happening and your users enjoying your application. Using multiple IDs for styling. We all know we should use IDs sparingly. We should use the classes sparingly. We're supposed to not use 2 IDs in our selectors. I kind of disagree. To me, this looks like I'm putting quite an important thing, which I've said is a unique, my news element. I'm putting it somewhere in a thing called a sidebar. It could be any sidebar on the page. This, though, tells me that there's a sidebar that it's gone into, and it lets me think about the styling that I'm doing with a bit more sense of seriousness. And even better, if I use a descendant selector in my style, I've now got a situation where when the browser is trying to work out if the element should be styled this way, it says, okay, I've found a news ID, it's great. Now I've got to go all the way back through my DOM, like so, to say, this element here, is it affected by this style, or this style, or this style, or this style, or this style? By putting a descendant selector CD in through your 2 IDs, that this div will only be affected by the style when it's a direct child of your sidebar. It just makes it easier for yourself. You've got a short URL, sorry, a short selector. Your browser is enjoying itself because it has to go through the entire DOM to work out what you're doing. It's just neat and tidy. Numbers for IDs. Now, I've been working with lots of CMSs that come out with IDs that are numbers for objects, and I used to cringe at the thought of having numbers as my IDs because I thought that you could never actually have numbers as IDs. It just doesn't work, it's wrong. But you can use numbers for IDs in HTML5. So if you've got the short doc type, you're away. I'm not saying change your practice now to make all your IDs use numbers, but I'm also saying don't be scared, don't be worried about finding them. I've made a little application to try and get some speakers for CJS, which is on next Wednesday, by the way, at 6 o'clock at Atlassian in the city. But I was using months of a year, and it was across 2 years, and it didn't feel right to put Y in front of 1, 3 and 1, 2, because I knew what a year was. And I thought I can't do it because I can't use numbers in my IDs. So I went to the internet, and the internet told me, you can use them. It doesn't work very well in jQuery. It doesn't work especially well in Query Selector All. But if you're using document.getElementById, perfect. Marriage made in heaven. It's about not only allowing yourself to understand that the things that you've known for the last, I started working on the web in 95. Wow, 18 years ago, I got told not to use anything other than letters in my IDs. Now I can use numbers. Fantastic, such progress. DVCS. Everyone uses DVCS. I can get straight through this. Thank you. Yes, that's good. Don't only use it for the important things. Use it for all the things. If you're doing some code and you're having fun and you think, oh, I'm just halfway through this project and I've had this really great idea, don't stop doing the first one and just do the second one. Like, thanks. Enjoy yourself. Do a fork in your branch, keep going, go back to the old code, use it for all your projects. You'll be surprised at how often it comes back and helps you out. Using sprites, we talked about these earlier. This is the Google sprite. It uses a buttload of images, but they're all coming down in one HTTP request rather than 26. That's a big saving. It's another one of those blocking features which makes your page load more quickly. It's loading in through your style sheets rather than loading in through your code. It just helps you on so many levels. Use base64 encoding. Now, so we're halfway through in 5 minutes time, and I'm probably going to go 5 minutes over. You all right with that? Okay. Is that 1 minute over? Base64 encoding doesn't work everywhere. It works most places to an extent, and it might work really well for what you want to do. Try it out, because it looks like this, which is more like that. That's actually the base64 encoded version of that sprite we saw a second ago. The sprite is the high end of the 20s in kilobytes. The string is the low end of the 30s in kilobytes. There's an overhead in base64 encoding which you can't escape. What you can do is trick out the design team by first of all optimizing the image which you turn into base64. So they've got a huge image, you optimize it down and then store it, you come out ahead. You're sort of winning because you've got this battle where performance on mobile isn't necessarily brilliant. but it's not that bad in some instances, and it can be excused in certain cases, but it's great in the desktop. And we still work on desktops too, remember? And the other thing to think about is the fact that the background on this web application, see, on a mobile, is encoded as well, but it's not base 64 encoded, it's base 128 encoded. So Alex Danilo from Chrome is going to release over the summer a base 128 encoding, which reduces the overhead of the encode down from about a quarter to sort of half that. So where you had troubles on your mobile, it's starting to get reduced. He can go higher and he can go to 256, but he doesn't see the point in that. So don't stop using a technology because one application for it isn't the right one. Keep it as a tool in your arsenal. Human readable code. Who writes JavaScript with E's in them? Is it an E for an event or is it an E for an error? We know it's an event because it's where we put it, but why not just call it an event? The guys at jQuery, as part of the push to 2.0, wanted to try and get this to come out in the code base, just so that developers who love jQuery got caught up in the idea of writing code that people could actually read. I think it's a nice idea. Keeping on jQuery for a second, this selector looks for a table row inside a table body with an ID of data table and goes all the way back to the body element to make sure that there's nothing else that hasn't missed. It puts the click event all the way back on all those elements it goes through on the way through. That's nasty because you can't really control what's going on. Changing to give your click target a context and a target means that it'll only go as far as that data table ID. It won't go up to the body element. You've got less click events, much cleaner, much faster. Your JavaScript will thank you. Learn new and new CSS. Now, there are two sorts of new CSS in my book. The first new CSS is CSS3. So this is our grid columns. It basically lets us develop with table layouts and feel good about ourselves, if that's possible. I figure if you want to develop with table layouts, just use a table for the layout. Enjoy yourself, go crazy. But find out what's going on. Don't throw the idea out because someone like me said it's a bad idea. See if it fits into some of your practice. It's something that you learn in this may influence other ways you code. The other sort of new CSS isn't new CSS. This is CSS2, but adjacent sibling selectors and descendant selectors, because of the vagaries of the browsers, weren't really open to us. So remember that things that aren't necessarily new could be a real useful tool because the target devices now allow you to use it. So we've lost IE7, we're losing IE8. These things make sense. Inherit on the color is a fun one. All of your anchors will go weird colors, like go blue, because they're an anchor. Put that on, and it asks the parent element what color it should be. And the parent element, because of the cascade, and not being an anchor, will go all the way back to find the first color declaration. So you do one color declaration in your body, and now all of your elements are right. Now, I'm not saying you want to do the same color text and links all the time, but if you've got a tile that you're using as a module and it's got an image and it's got a heading and it's got some text associated with it and a more word, it can be black text. It doesn't have to be bright blue with an underline on it. This helps you out. It's quick and easy. And while we're on the topic of our CSS3, let's of course clean it up, make it multi-line, and of course add in those trailing semicolons. That just looks messy. The top two lines that I like semicolons. Bad copy script. Make the browser help you. We kind of touched on that in the first presentation. My take on it is if you see you're needing to put styles on things which should out of the box already had those styles, stop it. Don't make yourself do that. Just go back and turn the bad style off in the first place. That slows down things remarkably. It makes your file bigger. It makes your browser do more work than it needs to. Don't hurt yourself. The other thing is, I found out by trial and error, if you put a single button into a form. Anyone know how the browser will treat it? Exactly. For some reason, it takes a button which isn't a submit button necessarily and says, you obviously are trying to submit, let's submit. So all you do is type button in there, and then you don't have to worry about going into your JavaScript and saying, hey, when I do this event, stop propagation and prevent default. That by itself is letting the browser do the heavy lifting, leaving out of your JavaScript, let the browser take care of it. You've got better things to do with your limited stack. Border box sizing. This is brilliant. This is what everybody wanted the first time they tried CSS years ago, and it didn't work. It's so new that my IDE has no idea how to make the colorization work for it. But the craziest thing is, this rule here has no vendor prefix and targets Internet Explorer. It's not always the browser that we choose to cast down that's the one that's slowing us down. That stuff, it's just brilliant. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. This is the width of our element, and this is the box that's been told to use box sizing. Fantastic. Try it. Don't try it if you've got heaps of IE 7s and 8s. Still try it anyway. Don't reset what you don't use. Now, there was a trend a couple of years ago, like a year and a bit ago now, that everyone should use these huge reset files with things like this. This is neat. I can't imagine the number of times that a delete element and an insert element and a keyboard I've just used them all the time, all the day long. But what happens is that every time you put a rule into your CSS, that rule has to get validated against every element in your DOM. So a simple paragraph, first of all, not only does it know that it's, there's a P. Aha, up there. That's all it needs. But it has to go through all those other rules to make sure that it isn't one of those. Slows you down. It's not going to mean that your app is going to become unperformant, but a fast thinking attitude when you're doing your coding will lead to a fast thinking response in your browser. All you need is that. Always put a background in, always put a color in, set your margins, play with headings if you want, and always do list style type none, because it's very sexy. It turns all of those ugly dots off. But don't do this. Find out what things actually use the selectors that you're using. So you've got an ordered list, an unordered list, and a line item. Problem is, the line item doesn't actually understand any of those things natively. So take it out of the equation. You're not applying styles you don't need, which you then have to turn off later on. Just style the things you want to style, and you'll be much better off. 17. Whew. And we're up to REMS. Not the 80s band of some renown. Not the groovy developer from Brighton in England who has a propensity for appearing naked with stacks of books in front of himself. We're talking about relative M dashes. It's like an M dash, but rather than being relative to the parent element, it's relative to the root of the document. So whatever your document has, so your HTML element has as its base, so every browser out of the box has a default of 16 pixels. It's the only thing that I know of that all browsers do that's not covered in any spec. No one told the browser guys that it's happening because we really enjoy it. But what it means is, we all know that when you put an LI, a style on your LI of 0.9M, you get this weird effect that as the line items nest, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. All seen that? By using REMS, because they go back to the parent, the root element, it's always the same size. So you don't have to keep going in and changing, okay, I've now got a rule for a line item, I'll now do a rule for a line item that's a child of a line item and make it bigger, and now do a rule for the line item that's a child of a line item that's a child of a line item and make it bigger still. It's just one rule to rule them all. We could talk on this. My precious. Optimize your optimization. We've now been through 18 things, quite obviously. You don't need to use all of them. They won't make your browser better straight away. They will start to make your attitude to development better the more you use. We're very happy to point out to our employers that I got emails today and I had to go to meetings and all these things took hours out of my day. These sorts of tricks will add hours back into your day. All you've got to do is do 60 of these things across the course of a week, you get a free hour. You can use it to go and buy coffee, or have a cigarette, or work. learn what things are called. For some reason that I don't know, and Fiona doesn't know either, if you put a drop shadow on text, it's called a text shadow. And if you put the same drop shadow on a box element, it's called a box shadow. It uses the same syntax, has the same effect, but it hasn't got the same name. If you do it in Photoshop, they're nice. They just call it a drop shadow. They get it. I don't understand why we've got to have those different things, but it's important to know what you're talking about, because if you write in here a drop and shadow, and get the syntax right, you're going to look at the syntax to see what you got wrong, assuming that you got the rule right. Make sure you know what you're talking about with your rules, and you're going to make things easier for yourself. Similarly, this looking thing, really simple. Tags. No, that's an element. It's made of tags, and we know that it's not called a tag because W3C school says it is. And I only really put this in because there's a big commerce ad here. And a sneaky Atlassian one as well, we won't talk about that. But they talk about HTML div tag. It's not a tag, it's an element. They call it a tag here and a tag there, and they call it a tag here and a tag there. Oh, and an element here. It's not a tag, it's an element. It's made of tags. It's got a start tag and an end tag, but it's an element. And it's not gonna, you're not gonna go to work the day after tomorrow calling it an element, and it's not gonna be earth-shattering. But when you're talking to people about elements, and you call them elements, it just makes it easier to understand. And each little thing you do to make your day that little bit easier makes your day a lot better. Number 20, learn from frameworks, don't just rely on them. By all means, ingest as much as you can from them, but you have to remember that the guys who wrote the framework work in a different environment to you. So this is a nice one. It's all purple, it's got squiggly lines on it, it's fantastic. It's version 3. For some reason, these guys break the cardinal rule of our 16-point default font size and say, no, 14. More 14 is much better. It screws up with the concept of having 16 pixel units in a 960 wide page, but it works with their version of a grid. In their environment, in the back end of the system that they used to make Bootstrap with, it made sense. It might not make sense for yours. You might find that the site you were building with love and care and devotion that looked brilliant, you drop Bootstrap in and all your fonts drop down sizes. It's not necessarily for you all the time. Use the bits that make sense, don't use all the bits. And of course, that's enough for me. And of course, gratuitous baby shot, thank you very much. And plug for the company, and that's my Twitter handle, and the request for questions. Do we have any?